Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of B Sharp in C Sharp tutorial series. In this video, we are going to talk about just-in-time compiler, its key concepts, types of JIT, compilation process, advantages, and the challenges. Guys, in this video, the most of the things would be theoretical. There are some diagrams I have prepared for you. There would not be a coding part in this video tutorial. Most of the things are theoretical part, and we are trying to understand just-in-time compiler, how it works, what is it, what is the use of just-in-time compiler. Okay, so let's begin with the definition of just-in-time compiler. The just-in-time compiler is the key component of .NET runtime environment. So it plays a crucial role in executing the .NET application by converting the intermediate language code into a machine language code. What does this mean? This means that whenever you are going to write a code in a particular language, your system is not going to understand that particular language. Okay, that language would be compiled into an intermediate language. That intermediate language would again gets converted into the machine language in the binary form. Okay, once that conversion is done, then only your system or your machine or your server is going to understand that particular code what you have written. Okay, so just-in-time compiler basically handles all these scenarios. It converts your code into an intermediate language. Later on, it gets converted into your native machine code, okay, at the runtime. There are like two key features you can say, or the key concepts inside this. One is intermediate language. Second one is the role of compiler, JIT compiler. If I talk about the intermediate language, so whenever we are going to compile a .NET application, the source code of that particular application in whatever language it is being written, whether it is being written into a C sharp, whether it is being written into VB.NET or F sharp. First of all, it gets compiled into the intermediate language. Uh, Commonly, it is known as Common Intermediate Language, or sometimes we say IL Intermediate Language. Sometimes we say MSIL also, Microsoft Intermediate Language. So whenever we write a code, we compile our code, it gets converted into intermediate language. So once your code is compiled and converted into the intermediate language, then the role of JIT compiler comes. What JIT compilers do, it converts your intermediate language into the machine code so that your CPU can understand the code, whatever you have written, and perform the operations for which you have written that particular code. So the JIT compilers comes at the runtime. Let's suppose you have created one desktop application or a web application. In case of a desktop application, you would be publishing it as a .exe file, but in case of web application, you would be publishing as DLL files. So whenever your application is going to execute, those DLLs or exe would contain some kind of intermediate language. At that time, at the runtime, the JIT compiler comes into the picture. It treats your code to convert into the machine language, okay, before it gets executed. So that is why the name comes just in time, because it compiles your code just before the execution. Okay, that is why we called it just in time. Now I have prepared this diagram for you guys to understand how all this process uh, completes under the JIT compiler. So here you can see on the very first level, you write your code, whatever language you choose, whether it is C sharp, Visual Basic, or F sharp. So here, all the languages supported by .NET or .NET framework, you write your code. Once you are done with your code, you compile your application, okay, to see whether you are having any kind of compilation error or not, right? You resolve those errors and make your code available without any error, any compile time error, okay? So whenever you are going to write a code, you would be compiling your code, and that time, the language specific compiler would check your code, okay, if there is an error in your code or not. If there is an error, it would show you in the error dialog, and if there is no error, it would build perfectly fine. Okay, so the first step is source code compilation. Once your source code is compiled, now the next step to publish your build. Okay, so before hosting your application on a particular platform, you need to publish your build. okay, in the form of .exe file or DLL files. As I earlier told you, if you are working on a desktop application or a console application, you would be having a .exe file. But in case of a web application, your entire code would get converted into the DLLs. Once your code is converted into the exe file or the DLLs, that those particular files, or at that time your code, your language code gets converted into an intermediate language. Okay, I hope you remember when I was telling you about the CLR or CTS, common type system. In that system, I told you about an example that in C# how we write a statement, and in VB.NET how we write the statement, right? We wrote two different types of statement, but at the end, whenever the code gets compiled, it converts into an intermediate language. Okay, so this intermediate language is a framework specific, where your code gets converted into the intermediate language, whatever language you have chosen to write your code. Okay, so once your DLLs and EXEs are ready, you need to publish those exe or DLS on your system, on or your server. So once you hosted those files on your system, this JIT compiler comes into the picture, because it is a part of runtime process. So whenever your code gets executed, this JIT compiler take the code, this intermediate language code from here, and it converts that code into a machine language, and after that it sends that particular code to your machine to execute the operations. Okay, so it's a three-step process. One, it picks the intermediate language code, convert it to the machine code. Third one is the execution. So once the machine code is converted, it would execute your code. But all this process happens at the runtime. So in this entire process, there are three types of JIT compiler we use. One is pre-JIT, second one is standard JIT, third one is Econo-JIT. So let's talk about what is pre-JIT, or we say NGen. So this pre-JIT uses the native image generator to pre-compile intermediate language to native code before runtimes. That means all the source code is compiled into a machine code at the same time in the single compilation cycle. This can reduce startup time, since the JIT compilation is done ahead of time. That means whenever you are going to host your application with this intermediate language, with the DLLs or the EXE, first of all, this pre-JIT compiler would come into the picture, which uses this ngen.exe, native image generator. So what it would do, it would compile your entire code in the same time for a single compilation cycle. Okay, it would compile each and everything into your code, and it would convert that particular code into the machine language, and it would make your code available for the code execution. So in this pre-JIT, it would just compile your entire code. Second one is standard JIT. Standard JIT compiles the methods at runtime whenever they gets called. Okay, let's suppose you have defined a functionality or a button click. On that particular button click, if there is a function is being called, so at that time this standard JIT would come into the picture. It would convert that particular intermediate language code to the machine code, and it would execute that code. In between that, it cache that particular code in the memory cache, so that whenever next time the request would come for the same method, it would not convert the entire code again. Okay, so it would pick the converted code from the memory cache, and it would send that code for the execution part. So this is the role of standard JIT. The third one is Econo-JIT. Econo-JIT basically optimize for memory uses, compiling code as needed and discarding whenever the code is no longer needed. Means in your application, you must be having some kind of code which runs only once. Okay, after that it is not required in the entire application. So in the Econo-JIT, the JIT compiler would take the intermediate language code, convert into the machine code, and send it for the code execution. Once the code execution is done, it just remove those methods from the memory. Okay, it would not required for the entire application. So this is the use of Econo-JIT. As I told you, we have 3 steps in this JIT compilation. First one is loading and verification. Second one is method invocation. Third one is execution. In the loading and verification, when a .NET application starts, the CLR loads the assembly, the compiled code. Okay, compiled code means the exe file which you have like published, or the DLLs, and it verifies if those files are having the correct intermediate language or not, if it is safe or not. Okay, so this JIT compiler would do a validation that your code got compiled into the intermediate language perfectly or not. Okay, this is the first step. Second step is method invocation. In method invocation, whenever a method is called for the first time, the JIT compilers compiles the intermediate language of that particular method and convert that intermediate language to a machine native code. Once that machine native code is converted and the operation is executed in that particular time framework, it just cache that particular method machine code, and whenever the next request comes for that particular method, it just picks the code from there and send it for the execution. Third step is you are seeing execution. So it is all about the executing your machine language code. Okay, so once the code is converted, it like execute directly by the CPU, allowing the application to run. So these are the 3 steps, you can say, the process of JIT. There are some advantage also of JIT. One is portability, second one is optimization, and the third one is security. Portability means, as I told you, whatever language you are choosing to write your code, at the end it gets converted into the intermediate language, because in the .NET framework there are multiple languages being supported. So at the end they need to create a generic build, right? Generic platform they need to create, or generic language they need to convert. Intermediate language is platform independent. Okay, so JIT compilation allow us to run the .NET application on different hardware architecture. Let's suppose we are using a particular machine having some kind of some configuration, 8 GB RAM or some CPU with some cores. Okay, so there we have written some kind of application and we have published that particular build on a particular system, right? If we want to host that application on the different hardware architecture, so definitely what we need to do is we need to send that particular build or DLL files or the executable files on that particular system and just host it. Okay, so the JIT compiler would convert that intermediate language on that particular system, and that would allow your like application to execute on that particular system. Okay, so that is how the portability is very easy. Second one is optimization. So JIT compiler internally automatically optimize so many things. Okay, so which makes sure to up the runtime. Okay, so there are so many optimization it automatically do. For an example, it does the dead code elimination. Dead code elimination means it removes the code that never executed. So in your code, now you must be having some kind of methods or some kind of code which is never executed. So JIT compiler simply removes that particular code, which is optimizing the performance and reducing the size of compiled code. Compiled code means the build size, the DLL size. Okay. Second one is loop unrolling. So JIT compiler optimize loops by reducing the overhead of repeated conditions. Okay. And branching also, which improving the execution speed. Okay, so loop unrolling is also being taken care by JIT compiler. Third one is register allocation. So JIT compiler optimize the use of CPU registers for frequently access variables, reducing memory access overhead. Uh, Security means the JIT compiler includes verification steps that ensure the intermediate language code adheres to type safety and the runtime constant. Okay, which enhance the security. Means whenever your code gets converted into the intermediate language, all the policies, all the security measures should be adhered by the JIT compiler. Okay, so these are some advantages of JIT. But there are some challenges also with the JIT. Those challenges are related to startup performance. So whenever you are going to launch a new build or you are going to host your application on a particular server, so initially the JIT compiler would compile your entire code, which may like delay some processes to execute or to run your application. So whenever you are going to host application for the first time, you would see your application would take a little bit time to get compiled. Okay, because the JIT compiler is going to execute or compile all your code over there. So it would affect some kind of startup performance. Second one is memory uses. So JIT compilation increase memory uses due to the need to store both IL and compile native code. So as I told you, like whatever system you are using to host your application, on that particular system, your IL code would be available. And whenever your application is going to be compiled, run, at that time in the background, JIT compiler would compile your code, convert that code into the machine language, and then execute your uh, operations. So at that time, it would increase the memory usage. Third one is non-deterministic performance. Because compilation happens at the runtime, so the performance characteristics can vary, especially during the initial phase of the application execution. As I told you, so whenever you are going to launch an application, in the initial phase, you may face little bit delay because of this JIT, because it would just compile all the code and convert it into the machine language. So these are some challenges I say. This is all about JIT compiler. If you have any kind of question or any kind of doubt related to the JIT compiler, do let me know into the comment box. I would be very much happy to answer your queries. And guys, if you have not subscribed this channel, I would request every one of you to subscribe this channel, share with your colleagues and friends, so that they can also get benefit from this channel, whatever knowledge I have, and I'm sharing with all of you. And in the coming session, I am going to talk about what is C Sharp, the key features of C Sharp, the use of C Sharp, and we are going to create a Hello World program also. And in the next session, we are going to understand the structure of that particular program. That's it for today, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good day.